So the central axis of my talk is how we can lay down that which obstructs and limits the innate love that is the nature of the way things are. So the natural human response to another living being is one of metta. And you can see this in the response of the Buddha to living beings. An unfettered heart-mind just meets people with love. Even those such as Angulimala, who have committed acts of great harm, or people who despise and insult the Buddha. And as Dharma Lila said earlier, the Buddha has great compassion, even for people's unskillful behaviour. And there's an image in the suttas of the Buddha looking out at all living beings with broad perspective. And he sees us all as like a great field of lotuses, some deep in the muddy water, some penetrating the surface, and some rising above unstained. So he sees us all as just in different stages of growth. There's no condemnation, no one who is beyond hope, no one outside the sphere of metta. But often in our day-to-day interactions with people, we have stuff in the way, obstructing that natural response. An experience that I've had in the Metta Bhavana is bringing someone to mind and having a felt sense of a gulf between us, filled with my views and thoughts about that person, a sense of distance from them, and not being able to truly see them through this field of my own stuff. So in this talk, I'll be focusing on something that I see as a root of harm and disconnection, broadly on a societal scale, as well as in our day-to-day interactions. And this is very alive for me in how I examine my attitudes to people and try to stay in connection. So this is the process of othering or polarizing. So when we hold a sense of division, an us and a them, an in-group and an out-group. So in reality, there is an enormous diversity and complexity to living beings, a great vibrant web of interwoven processes. But we carve that complexity up into one group over here and one group over there. So rather than understanding categories and labels as provisional, as play words, we see them as truly separate and distinct. And there's a quote from Thomas Paine which echoes our connection. "The world is my country, all mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion." So the root of othering is the process of selfing, where we partition reality into self and other, which creates this illusion of separateness. And we perpetuate this dividedness on a broader scale through tribalism. And this is where we are attached to and identify with people who we see as sharing a characteristic with us. So this is our in-group, and we can have all sorts of different in-groups: race, religion, gender. So it's an extension of our self-view and our self-identification. And in contrast, people who don't share that characteristic are the other, the out-group. And we tend to associate people in the out-group with more negative qualities in comparison to our in-group. And we also tend to see our in-group as diverse and complex, while viewing the out-group as more homogeneous, more stereotyped and similar to each other. And there's a lot of unconscious and unexamined bias that's introduced in these assumptions we make, especially towards the out-group. So this creates a distortion in our perspective and our heart response. And it's a bit like a dam that obstructs the natural flow of our metta. So rather than responding to somebody in all of their complexity and beauty, our out-group labelling and othering can loom so large that it obscures their humanity and their true qualities. So they aren't one lotus among this great field of all beings. They're one of those people. And I mentioned a few of the dividing lines we draw earlier. Race, religion, gender. And other lines we draw might be around sexual orientation, class, political affiliation. And we often also draw a line around holding a particular view on an important issue. Brexit, transgender rights, the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so a lot of these categories and views are very emotive and have a lot of meaning and significance. So I'm not suggesting a sort of beige, equivocating, sort of everyone is the same, all views are equivalent. But it's the second step. So after discerning a difference, where we other, we divide, we distance, we judge and categorize. So where that difference obscures our true connection. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a teaching that through the rounds of rebirth, all living beings, each one of them, has at one point been our mother. So that is the true level of our connectedness. And what also feels very relevant is Amitabha's discriminating wisdom. So Amitabha, as the red Buddha of love, has the particular wisdom of discriminating in the sense of discerning or seeing the particular qualities of each being. So he doesn't love beings for being like him. He loves people in their wholeness, exactly as they are. So Amitabha cherishes and delights in their uniqueness. And an important area where othering and assumptions cause profound harm is around race. And particularly in the UK, the attitudes of white people towards people of colour. So we've been conditioned by racist cultural messaging, which associates negative qualities with people and communities of colour. And so this unconscious or unexamined bias shapes how we connect with and open to people, and is likely to be a significant factor in the whiteness of Triratna in the West. So investigating our own biases, our own racist conditioning, is a profound expression of the first precept in seeking to practice non-harm. And it's also a metta practice of laying down the obstacles to love and connection, and particularly of creating a sangha that is a safe and welcoming context for people of colour. So next, I'll share a sutta which shows how our attachment to views and to our own status can lead to division and othering. And it's a sutta that feels incredibly relevant to modern life, and especially our online behaviour. Here alone is purity, they say, denying that there is purification in other teachings, speaking of the beauty in that which they depend on. Each one is dogmatic about their own idiosyncratic interpretation. Desiring debate, they plunge into an assembly where each takes the other as a fool. Relying on others, they state their contention, desiring praise while claiming to be experts. Addicted to debating in the midst of the assembly, their need for praise makes them nervous. But when they're repudiated, they get embarrassed. Upset at criticism, they find fault in others. If their doctrine is said to be weak, and judges declare it repudiated, the loser weeps and wails, moaning, "They beat me." When these arguments come up among ascetics, they get excited or dejected. Seeing this, refrain from contention, for the only purpose is praise and profit. But if, having declared their doctrine, they are praised there in the midst of the assembly, they laugh and proudly show off because of it, having got what they wanted. Their pride is their downfall, yet they speak from conceit and arrogance. Seeing this, one ought not get into arguments, for experts say this is no way to purity. As a warrior, after feasting on royal food, goes roaring, looking for someone to fight, go off and find an opponent, Sura, for here, as before, there is no one to fight. When someone argues about a view they've adopted, saying this is the only truth, say to them, here you'll have no adversary when a dispute has come up. There are those who live far from the crowd, not countering views with view. Who is there to argue with? Who is there to argue with you, Pasura, among those who grasp nothing here as the highest? So I think if that was the guidance for Triratna online spaces, we would do very well. So, out of our self-view, our idea that we are a separate and distinct entity, we can either identify with our views or see ourselves as possessing them. And this sutta describes the blowing of the worldly winds of praise and blame, so bigging us up or knocking us down, based on how other people happen to perceive our views. And you can see in this sutta that our attachment to ourself, and by extension our attachment to our views, creates a sense of separateness and conflict when we encounter somebody holding a different view. So in this way, metta is an insight practice. Because when we recognise that our interconnection and love for other beings is stronger and more real than our attachment to views, status, winning, losing, then we can let go and grasp but nothing here as the highest. So cultivating our heart connection to living beings and practicing metta allows us to see that we aren't separate, allows us to see that nobody is our adversary. And the last facet of othering I'm going to explore is the people we think deserve it. And yeah, just to frame this, when I was writing this, I'd been engaging quite a bit with the media around the Israel-Palestine conflict. So this sort of emerged out of that place of sort of seeing harm, seeing conflict, and seeing the ways that we respond to that. So this is exploring how we respond, or the people that we consider outside the scope of our compassion and our understanding. Yeah, I suppose there's often an assumption, for me at least, that I make going through the world of like, I'm a Buddhist. I think all beings deserve love. That just feels like a base truth. And that ideal is deeply beautiful and important. And I think forming a relationship with that heart wish to love and seek the best for all beings is an expression of the bodhicitta. But I imagine most of us can think of at least one person, maybe a politician, who we do not seek to love. Maybe one. And the key Dharma teaching here is from the Dhammapada, which is a collection within the Pali Canon. Not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. Not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. So this is the area of translating the sense of connectedness and metta that we might contact, sort of in a beautiful shrine room, sort of practicing the metta bhavana, surrounded by lovely Sangha members. Sort of translating that into our day-to-day lives as we encounter people we disagree with, and especially people we think or we consider to be causing harm. And this is because, so to use an extreme example, even people in sort of hate groups, people in the KKK, love and care for other people in the KKK. That's a very extreme example. But loving and caring for people who are like us, people we agree with, is common to most groups and contexts throughout the world. So metta that is conditional on people behaving how we'd like them to behave is very limited. And a few years ago, I read Vishvapani's anthology, Challenging Times, which shares stories of people practicing under difficult conditions. And there's a very powerful account from a woman who experienced abuse in her childhood from a female relative. And she talks about the process of forgiving this woman. And it's a deeply moving account of someone with incredible strength and compassion and metta. And after I finished reading the account, I had this piercing anger. It's like, I don't forgive her. I don't forgive her for doing that. was like somebody needed to hate this woman. It would be wrong for me not to hate her. Yeah. It was a strange reaction to sit with after witnessing somebody's incredible compassion. So sometimes it can feel like the moral high ground, or even a moral necessity, to condemn and have a negative response to someone, especially if they are a cultural other, or if they belong to a stigmatized group. And again, the most piercing and ultimate rebuke of this is from the Dhammapada. Not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. So hatred is never truly righteous. But we can have a great deal of understanding for our experiences of hatred. We can bring a great deal of compassion and gentleness and patience, as hatred is one of the root poisons of samsara, and it will arise in our experience. But we can try to recognise when we have placed somebody outside the sphere of metta. And we can feel into how we're relating to them. Someone making abrasive comments online, the abusive partner of someone you love. They aren't monsters, they aren't aliens, they're human beings shaped by conditions. And if we have the resources, the resourcing, we can try to meet them with empathy and with compassion, and try to consider what the world might look like from their perspective, because nobody is the villain in their own story. And so often people cause harm out of their own pain, their own fear, and their own distorted view of what is right, in the same way that we have our own distorted views. So if we were reborn in the same conditions that shaped that person, we might be sitting right where they are. And to borrow a Christian expression that came up in our group earlier, there but for the grace of God go I, which I think evokes that spirit. So exploring if it's possible to stay open, even provisionally, to their humanness, and to come back to the Buddha's vision of all living beings as a great field of lotus blooms. We don't have to disown any of our siblings. We don't have to cast them out. And we can weep Avalokiteshvara's tears at seeing the harm we do to each other, while also embracing these beings and having hope for their awakening, seeing that their roots are woven together with ours in the same rich earth.